So I think I know almost all of you, and I think almost all of you know me, but my name is Ann Murphy. I'm a member of the chapter steering committee or leadership team, and a long time, probably too long, convener of these sessions for the Northern Virginia Advocates for Justice. So the fall session is intended to rouse us out of our summer slumber and focus on Virginia state doings and the upcoming 2025 General Assembly. Noting, of course, that most of us have been quite focused on the national election cycle, right? That has been ongoing without stop for years now. Used to be periodic. But just to remind us that there are no state level races on the November 5th ballot this year. So we will continue to work with the senators and the delegates who remain in office through the 2025 General Assembly. So before we launch into the substance of tonight's session, I'd like us to offer our land acknowledgement, recognizing and remembering the Native peoples who were removed from the place where we sit. These include the Piscataway, the Anacostanks, Pamunkeys, Mattapineats, Nanjamites, and the Toxahent peoples. We also recognize and remember the enslaved people of color, separated from their families and their native lands by force and made to labor under harsh conditions to build much of Northern Virginia. So I invite each of us through our own faith lens to observe a moment of silence. Silence for ourselves, our families, our community, our commonwealth, our country, our world, and our planet. Thank you. So as noted on the flyer promoting tonight's session, there are 3 areas of interest that we want to share and discuss and respond to your questions and ideas. So again, feel free to share them in the chat or use the raised hand or some way to be acknowledged. So we want to talk a little bit about the upcoming regional celebration event on September 22nd. I'll give you a brief update and encourage you and your congregation members to join us. We want to share what's happening in the civic engagement space and seek your ideas on what you and your community are doing in that space. And we want to outline the center's plans and tee up for you the why and how for our pre-General Assembly session visits with our state senators and state delegates. And we promise that we will conclude by 8:30 at the latest. So, everybody okay with that agenda, more or less? Less or more? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. I don't see any questions in the chat. I see a couple of thumbs up, that's good. So first, the Northern Virginia Regional Celebration Event. Is there anybody on this session tonight who doesn't know about that? Do I see any raised hands?
I don't.
John Peterson doesn't know about it.
I don't know about it, Ann.
Beth doesn't know about it, but Beth, you're coming to it, so that's okay.
Oh. I will know about it.
Right, so you'll learn
Sorry.
about it. Well, information about this has been running in the weekly roundup on the Wednesday newsletter that we receive from Richmond for a while now. But the Northern Virginia celebration event, because what's happening is there are regional events going on all over the Commonwealth during September and October. The Northern Virginia one is on Sunday, September 22nd, coming up. And it starts at 5 o'clock and it'll be over no later than 8. We are early birds. So it's basically a celebration, a gathering time. There'll be some music. We'll have a dinner and there'll be an inspiring keynote. And there will be awards made to a state senator and to a state delegate from Northern Virginia, and an award for a congregation, and an award for a volunteer. It's intended, the event is intended to be fun. It's intended to be a friend raising and fundraising. So our event that several of us have been on a planning team working with Lakeisha Cook, the co-executive director, I guess, is that how you say it? Co-leader of the Virginia Interfaith Center, on putting this together. So first of all, I just want everybody to know that our event is being generously underwritten by the Virginia Theological Seminary. They are providing the venue, they are providing the food, and they are providing the beverages for us to gather there. We have a music group who will be sort of like background music, cocktail hour type music from 5 until 6, dinner at 6, keynote and awards at 7. Good night by 8, we promise. We currently have, there's a limit on the space for 150 people. And we currently have, I think, maybe 8 tables of 10 people each that have been sponsored by congregations or very generous individuals. So there are still some tables available for congregations or individuals to sponsor. Each table will have 10 seats, which means if you sponsor a table, you get 10 tickets. You can invite your friends, your family, your clergy, whoever. So we currently have room for a few more folks. So if you haven't already purchased a ticket, I would encourage you to do so sooner rather than later. And if you're unavailable, maybe a friend would like to go, or a congregation member. And again, part of the purpose of this event is not only to recognize all those special people who help the center get to the point of what they have achieved so far, but the purpose is really to raise some funds. The Virginia Interfaith Center is a 501c3 organization. It cannot pay its staff and it cannot do its work if y'all aren't contributing. So that's a chunk of the reason for having these dinners. Justice advocacy really needs financial support. So if you can't come, maybe you can make a donation. Any questions about the September 22nd event at the Virginia Theological Seminary, conveniently located only a mile east of the exit of 395 Seminary Road? Everybody knows where it is, I think. Yep.
This is Jamie. I'll just say the other virtue of this kind of event is it's a great way for folks like all of us on the screen here today to actually get to meet each other in person and get to know each other a little better, and bonding and stuff like that, and meeting folks that you don't know from other faith communities. So that's, for me, that's one of the big attractions of it.
Part 2, civic engagement. So what are you and what is your congregation doing to promote participation in the elections as faith-filled citizens? Today, I was out and about with a friend, and I saw a big sign, a huge banner in front of Fairlington United Methodist Church, corner of 395 and King Street. We are, I should look at it for sure. We are a 100% voting congregation. So who else on this screen has a 100% voting congregation banner? Sarah Leonard, can you unmute for a minute and tell us who your congregation is?
We're Christ the Servant Lutheran Church in Reston, Virginia. We were a 100% voting congregation last midterm election, and now once again this election. And we're proud to be so.
Very good. Yay for you. Excellent. Yay for your congregation. Anybody else?
We love Sheila at our congregation.
Yeah, and we at Acatech, we were likewise last year, and we have been confirmed that we are again this year.
Wonderful. Acatink United.
And again, we love Sheila too.
Unitarian, yeah.
Acatech Unitarian Universalist Church.
Right.
Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Alexandria was last year and is again this year. And Sheila or somebody is coming to speak this Sunday at our church.
Patrick, that's terrific. That's
You
wonderful.
betcha.
Congratulations to all of you who are doing that. So for those whose congregation is not yet a 100% voting congregation, there are banners available if they're earned. The banner in front of Fairlington United Methodist says, "Your vote, your voice." I think that might be similar or the same.
And Lawrenceville Presbyterian is going to have a registration day on Sunday, October 6th. And we're
Right.
going to have computers there where people can check their voting status, or they can register, or they can ask for an absentee ballot. And it will be, mentioned from the pulpit to make sure that people do it. I don't have any idea how close we are to 100% congregation, but we're not there for sure.
Mm-hmm. But we're all trying, right?
Yep.
That's a piece of the picture, is we're all trying. I don't think we have to ask every single member of the congregation if they have voted. Sheila might be able to clarify some of that, but I was just about ready to say, how about voter registration events? Civic responsibility to vote, and the doing voter registration is nonpartisan. So none of us should have a problem with any of our clergy, and I don't care what community any of us belong to. So on October 6th, Our Lady Queen of Peace Catholic Parish in South Arlington is also conducting voter registration.
Also, a couple of our members are members of the Falls Church Democratic Committee, and they went there to volunteer to register, and particularly to register at George Mason or something like that. And basically they were told that they have a lot of volunteers who want to register. So that's good news. If you wanted to register, perhaps they don't need you. I don't know, but that's what they were told at Falls Church.
Okay.
So Rock Spring's been partnering with the NAACP and the League of Women Voters, and we did the training during the summer with the Center for Common Ground, and then people have been signing up to help voter registration outside of our congregation, because we do have a pretty active registrated people.
Thank you, Arlene. There are a couple of notes in the chat that might be of interest to all of you if you can listen with your ear and still scroll down your chat, just to see some of the comments that have been made about other congregations and what they're doing and how they're doing it, as well as to answer, is it Sue's question?
Yes.
Sue, I understand what you're saying, because likewise, our parish has a number of members or worshipers, I'll say, who are not citizens. And so they are not eligible to vote. But you know, my position on that, on not so much on that, but on the idea of congregations hosting voter registration, it's a very visible sign of what all faiths believe in, that we all have civic responsibility. So if, even though we've got people who are either already registered or not eligible to vote, the fact that we have a table outside of our sanctuary or whatever says a lot. Says a lot to your own people as well as to any public who might be walking past. There's also candidate forums. Oh, Ed.
Can I ask one more in relation to that?
Yeah, go ahead,
Because
Sue.
I understand when people are not citizens but are here legally. But there's another whole category of people who are not here legally. And at least someone I know is quite frightened about being singled out as to being not registered. So that turns out to be tricky in our congregation. I mean, it's not just one person. So I just raised that because for us, it is, what should I say? Sensitive. It's sensitive.
Right.
If I may briefly comment on that.
And then Ed Kringer wants to say something. So go ahead, Sheila.
So sorry for cutting off folks who've got their
No?
hands raised. It's definitely true. No one who is not, people who are not citizens can't vote, no matter your documentation status, whether you're an immigrant with a green card or temporary visa or refugee who has not yet gotten to citizenship. No one who's a non-citizen can vote. People who are not yet 18 cannot vote. Folks who've been convicted of a felony and haven't had their voting rights restored, they can't vote either. So actually quite a large portion of the population who is unable to vote. 100% voting commitment doesn't say, I'm going to illegally sneak my 2-year-old in to vote at the polls. It simply says, we are going to get all of our members who are eligible to vote their values. That said, I just want to touch on one small other thing, which is that there has been recently some updates of the voter rolls in Virginia. About 6,000 names were removed. And some of that, so I would encourage everyone who is eligible to vote to check your voter registration and confirm that that it is still active. Because I've heard some stories of folks who are eligible who've been removed from the voter rolls because of confusion. I don't think there should ever be a calling out of folks who are not eligible to vote, who aren't voting. And I think that within your congregation, you can be really pastoral about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sheila. That was a good clarification. Go ahead, Ed.
And Sheila, if you disagree with how I'm going to say this, please jump in. But we had this discussion last year because we were not comfortable as a congregation going out and checking to see if people voted. And we're just not going to do that. And we went back and discussed, and VICPP said, no, we're not, you don't have to guarantee everybody voted. What they were looking for is to open the opportunity for people to vote, to make sure you're doing those things like putting out information, having the registration tables, having things in your, ours is called This Week, that talk about voting so that there is nobody who's going, huh, I didn't know how to do this. And that was considered to be good for 100% voting, but not double checking to make sure everybody did. That takes the pressure off, those people.
Not invasive.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Good point. Rick.
On the subject of voter registration, Emmanuel Church on the Hill in Alexandria will be doing voter registration booth at our Virginia famous pumpkin patch starting September 29th and then the next 2 Saturdays in October. So we'll be doing that in coordination with some other churches in Alexandria too.
Great. Excellent. Any other questions on voting congregations, voter registration events, candidate forums? The Northern Virginia chapter is co-sponsoring a forum on Sunday, October, that first Sunday, what Sunday is that? October 6th, when a lot of us are doing voter registration. The League of Women Voters of Arlington and Alexandria, it's one organization, is sponsoring a candidate forum that this chapter is co-sponsoring along with AAUW and a number of other organizations that are co-sponsors. So that information will be posted in the weekly roundup. And if anybody knows of other candidate forums that people, members of the center, folks involved in the center would like to know about, if you would get that information together and let Sheila know, because then she can get it into the weekly roundup just as a mark your calendar kind of thing. Other efforts with civic engagement is this. Everybody writing postcards, I hope. I got my package of 100. My fingers are going to be a little sore trying to do 100. If anybody wants to help me, I'm happy to have the help. Those packages are fabulous. Robert Lester in the Richmond office of the center assembles them, puts them together, and sends them out. We get the mailing list, exactly to whom these postcards should be addressed. We get the script, exactly what to write on the back of the postcard, and instructions and terms of when to mail them. So I have from now until September the 30th to mail my 100 postcards. They're going to Suffolk County, I think it is. Or maybe it's Suffolk, Virginia, not sure what. Under low response voters, and we know we can learn who those are through the Voter Access Network, which is a digital kind of thing. We don't know how people vote. And at the Virginia Interfaith Center during civic engagement time, we don't care how people vote. We just want people to vote. People who are eligible should be voting. So postcarding is another thing. How many people, if you're postcarding, maybe drop that in the chat so we all know what the pressure is. We want to be just as good as you. And then finally, the big element of civic engagement is having conversations with other people and making your voting plan. So make sure you talk to the people with whom you live. Make sure you talk with family members who live in Virginia, particularly. But really, because of national elections, everybody who is eligible ought to be voting. It's really a travesty, in my opinion, that in the United States, fewer than 50% of the eligible voters vote. So we all have a responsibility, not only for ourselves to vote, but also to encourage others, that should just be a normal thing. We all have local elections this November. We don't have state elections, but I think everybody up here, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Loudon, if you're from there, everybody has local elections. We've got either, the local city council or the mayor or the county board. We have school board elections. And, the results of those elections are really, really critical to our everyday lives. These are the people who are making the decisions about our own communities. So important to have those conversations. Any further comments, questions? Is there anything? No? Okay. Phew. Now you don't have to listen to me anymore, because we're going to talk about the Interfaith Center's legislative plans for the 2025 General Assembly, what some of the priorities are. And Kay Francis is going to share that, and she's going to tee us up for setting up appointments to meet with our state senator and our state delegate sometime between, well, probably after November the 5th, I think is what Kay Francis and I agreed on. Go to it, Kay Francis, and thank you.
Thanks, Anne. As I think Kim Bobo said to us sometime this summer, you no sooner get through or almost get through with one General Assembly than you're starting planning for the next. And I'm sure everybody here knows that in Virginia, our General Assembly will be meeting in January. And I guess I'll let everybody know at this point, for those who have attended Day for All People in Richmond in the past, I believe the day that VICPP will be meeting with all of our legislators in Richmond is January 15th, 2025. For those of you who have not gone to Day for All People, it's a wonderful chance for us to meet people from all over the Commonwealth. And there are workshops that VICPP holds for us, but we also all have a chance to meet with our delegates and our senators. And it does make a difference. Any of you who have met with delegates or senators know that they pay a lot of attention to the people who are in their districts. So maybe put January 15th on your calendar. We will probably be doing the big bus again. And several people drive themselves. I know last year a couple of faith organizations also chartered buses. So there are ways to get to Richmond if you don't want to drive. So preparing for that session in January, the whole legislative session, not just the Day for All People, is a challenge. And I'm sure you're all aware that the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia vetoed a large number of bills coming out of the 2024 session. And he drastically changed or watered down many others. That, of course, was a disappointment for those of us who volunteer for VICPP, because we had some bipartisan support for several of our bills, but we will have to live to fight another day on many of those. So the vetoes and the changes have required a lot of thinking and strategizing and discussions by VICPP staff in Richmond and with our allies and other advocacy groups and partners in supporting various legislative initiatives in terms of the best way to move forward. One of the things that I have learned from Kim Bobo, the VICPP executive director, and I've learned a lot, is that sometimes change is incremental and often it's very slow, but you just keep chipping away and eventually, and sometimes amazingly quickly, but often slowly, progress occurs. So the VICPP staff has been working this summer to put together the priorities and the emphasis areas for 2025. And Sheila told me earlier today that the VICPP board is meeting Thursday, I believe, to vote up or down, add, subtract, come up with the final list of priorities. So we will know what those are within a matter of a few weeks, I would imagine. And as many of you know, what the staff will then do is prepare fact sheets on the major initiatives or the wish list, I guess you would say. I have been impressed in the relatively short time I've been involved with VICPP at how sophisticated the partnerships and the coalitions with other organizations have become. Anne has mentioned that, you know, VICPP needs your financial support. And the good news is that there are a lot of organizations in the justice arena. The bad news is that sometimes the money just doesn't go far enough. But we don't have to go it alone on many of these initiatives. So I'm going to go through very quickly and in a broad kind of way, because I certainly can't read the minds of the VICPP board, and I don't want to preempt anything that they might decide to do. But one of the areas that will continue to be a big priority and that is so important to many faith groups is affordable housing. And one of the initiatives that we pushed very hard last year, sort of modeled on the California program, were legislative changes that would make it easier to develop faith property into affordable housing without having to go through the lengthy and complicated zoning process locally. As I have been reminded many times, you can't cut out the local people, because if you do, you're going to have trouble. So this did not make it any farther in this year than being referred to the Housing Commission. But the Housing Commission did held a hearing this summer, I think in June. So they're talking about it. People now, I think, in the legislature understand much more about this initiative, and it will be on our agenda. There are all kinds of things in the health equity arena that need to be accomplished. I think many of us have learned a lot more in the past couple of years about health deserts and parts of Virginia that just do not have adequate health care. And there's several proposals that probably will deal with increasing access to Medicaid, such as using Medicaid to access nurses in schools for children, as well as hopefully bringing back Cover All Kids, which did not make it through this year, which is to deal with about 13,000 children who are immigrants who do not have health care. So that will be another one. Unconscious bias and cultural competency training had so many champions in the General Assembly, but didn't make it through the governor, even though we had several Republicans advocating for it. So this is a short amount of training to make sure that health professionals understand that they can be unconsciously biased in the decisions they make in a healthcare way for people who are women or people of color. And working family supports, it seems like we talk about this every year. 2 long time efforts to increase the minimum wage. I think this one is to $15 an hour, and paid sick days for everybody in the Commonwealth. They kind of came close, but the governor vetoed the increase in the minimum wage. And paid sick days didn't get through. I don't think it got through to the governor. So I think VICPP leadership is trying to decide, do we need to wait till we have another governor? Or do we try to find champions for these very important dimensions for working families and see if we can get it through with enough arm twisting of the governor? Criminal justice reform, again, we ran into some roadblocks. We tried unsuccessfully to get free communications in the prisons for between incarcerated people and family members. There is all kinds of social science research on what a difference it makes to family members as well as to the incarcerated to be able to stay in communication. Many states don't charge incarcerated people for phone calls. Virginia does. So what we got through was a slight increase in the number of people you could call and encouragement to the Department of Corrections to try to hold the costs down in the future. And I'll mention one other program that is a new program, I think, for VICPP to emphasize, and that is higher education in prison. I had the privilege this summer to participate in 4 meetings, Zoom calls, where we were talking about screenings of a Ken Burns documentary of a few years ago about the college in prison program that New York State has. It, of course, as a Ken Burns video, it was impressive, and it really changed my thinking on the issue. So VICPP has Terry Irwin, who's on staff, has been on staff for a few years, who will be working in this program, trying to create partnerships with community colleges as well as 4-year schools. And of course, funding is important, and that's really another thing that we would be seeking. So I'm going to stop there and ask Sheila, who is more familiar with the draft agenda than I am, whether there's anything major that I have left out.
You have not left out anything major. I will ever so briefly touch on a couple of things. Of course, within the health equity sphere, the things that Kay Francis touched on, you know, cover all kids and expanding access to Medicaid, all of that is deeply important. But we are going to continue work on the unconscious bias initiative. Additionally, within criminal justice reform, we are continuing a lot of what we've been doing before and starting the work on higher education in prison. We're also looking at a couple of bills around youth who are incarcerated and improving conditions for young people who are in juvenile detention. Really excited to be working in that space and with all of you. And as always, we will be supporting our partners on other important bills, things like tax reform and tenant protections, and in all of that are things that will be on Virginia Interfaith's agenda as well.
Ken Spiker has asked about gun violence.
Oh, yes,
gun
thanks, Ken.
safety legislation.
So the short answer is Virginia Interfaith supports gun safety and decreasing gun violence. There are a few concrete reforms that we would absolutely support were they to get a hearing in the General Assembly. Expanding background checks, decreasing folks with convictions on their records, access to get firearms, that sort of thing. That said, this has turned into a deeply partisan issue, the way it's perceived in Richmond. So our suspicion is that no matter what passes the General Assembly, most gun safety legislation may not get signed into law, but we will continue to support it, especially things that feel like viable compromises.
Just an FYI, I can't speak for every other denomination, but there are a lot of United Methodists in Virginia who are very interested in supporting whatever legislation comes up. I assume that's true elsewhere too, but.
That is certainly true. I will mention briefly that one of our chapters in particular, the James River chapter, kind of in the greater Williamsburg area, has really taken gun violence as an issue priority. And knowing that the legislative path is a challenging one right now, they've done some stuff on the ground. They've got an event coming up at the end of September, which is a Guns to Garden Tools gun safe surrender event to allow folks who don't want their firearms anymore to be able to give them over and those firearms be turned into garden tools. Very biblical roots and a beautiful way to kind of keep the conversation going, even if the legislation feels like it's stalled. But there will certainly be a few bills and we will be promoting those.
I think Joe Canny had an interesting question in the chat. What can VICPP do to persuade the governor to support some or all of our priorities? Do we have any kind of a toe in the governor's office door?
That has been a tough one. You know, Virginia Interfaith staff has met with some of the governor's staffers and generally had positive meetings, but then not very consistent follow-up. We do have two toes in the governor's office. One is actually with this higher education in prison initiative. If you read the weekly roundup every Wednesday, which can be a tall order, so no judgment if not, you may have seen a couple of weeks ago that the governor created an executive order around increasing services for people who are incarcerated and giving them more straightforward pathways to streamline into the community. One aspect of that is increasing higher education for people who are incarcerated. So we've been in conversations with very high level people in the Department of Corrections, some of which are Governor Youngkin appointees, on this topic. And Terry and Kenneth are doing a ton of work in this space. Another area where we've had medium success doing outreach to the governor is unconscious bias. Now, he did veto that bill last year, but we have connections. Again, his new chief of staff is the former head of Health and Human Services, who we have a positive relationship, formerly Secretary Littell, now Director Littell, I think is his new title. Additionally, Catherine, our health equity manager, has been doing a lot of work around tracking down really strong Republican connections to get us in the door in the governor's mansion, whether it be with the governor himself, with staff members, with his wife. So there's a lot of avenues we've been pursuing. Those two issue areas are probably our strongest paths forward. In terms of what the ICPP can do as a whole, it never hurts to remind the governor that as a public servant, the people of Virginia are the ones he is responsible to. Writing letters, writing emails, making phone calls, all of that is important and helps. Another path forward is working through legislators. There are folks in the governor's party who are willing to have these conversations and also willing to negotiate back and forth to stand up for what they believe in. We saw that a lot a couple of years ago with Virginia Interfaith's solitary confinement bill, where our Republican patron really stood firm on some of the important pieces and got it through despite some back and forth with the governor and the attorney general. So I think there is honestly hope. I truly love working in state politics because you're not banging your head against a wall. There are real people and there is real change possible.
I think there's always hope. And I think a critical aspect of what you have shared, Sheila, is not always the specifics, but for everyone, and particularly newer people to the work of advocacy, if you will, to understand that incrementalism that Kay Francis was talking about, that it's just, you don't just go from point A to point B in one legislative session. Just because we think this is the right thing to do, it just doesn't work like that. And that is where the work, particularly of the staff, in terms of the policy wonk aspect, and the role of all of us as advocates to sort of support that policy work that the staff is doing in those negotiations, in those coalitions, in working with departmental people. You don't always work with the head honcho. It's just, and we all know that, right? And I mean, in a sense, we all know that. You don't go directly to the president, you go through the steps, the people in the organization that will, kind of grease the wheels for you. So that you can eventually achieve what it is that you're seeking to do.
Many of you know how important the Northern Virginia legislators are in Richmond for enacting bills focused on social, economic justice, health equity, and criminal justice reform. NoVA legislators are a large voting bloc and very often support VICPP priorities. And that's why our chapter tries to meet with our delegates and senators every fall, as many as we can. It's a time when people like Carl can bring personal stories to the legislators, which make a huge difference. It's a time when we can remind the legislators what's important and why it's important. And it's also a time when we can thank them for being so supportive of justice in so many ways and being encouraging and supportive to VICPP. We'll start the meetings, as Ann mentioned, after the November 5th election. So they will start in about 2 months. Many of you have participated in the past, some of you in leadership positions. And if you haven't participated before, sometimes the meetings are on Zoom, sometimes the meetings are in person. A lot of that depends on the legislators' availability and preference. So Audrey Wang, who is on the leadership team, and I will start sending out emails from the NoVA mailbox in October asking for volunteers to participate. What we really need initially is people who will volunteer to take the lead. For example, for Elizabeth Bennett Parker, who's a delegate from Alexandria. Whoever has the lead for a delegate or a senator will then go ahead and set up the meeting, and then we'll invite others who are constituents to attend that meeting. So if any of you are really looking forward to participating as a leader, please feel free to email us now. The email is NoVA, NoVA, at Virginia Interfaith Center, all one long word, .org. NoVA at Virginia Interfaith Center.org. And either Audrey or I will respond. These meetings are actually pretty fun. It gives you a chance to work with other chapter members. We are lucky in Northern Virginia, as I said, that our representatives are generally pretty supportive of at least some of the VICPP priorities. So it's an easier kind of meeting when you're not. But I would encourage you to participate, and you'll be hearing more about this. And as I mentioned, VICPP provides us with background information sheets. So you hardly ever would end up talking about something you don't have some background on. So that's all that I have, Anne. So I'm going to turn it back to you. Oh,
good.
Jamie has a question.
So Jamie has the question, and your Comcast, Kay Francis, is
Oh, sorry.
Jamie.
Yeah, one of the issues that's mattered a lot to Emmanuel Church on the Hill, and I think many others, has under the criminal justice heading, is trying to limit, if not abolish, solitary confinement. And the Interfaith Center's been partially successful in getting passage first of legislation that would put a lot of procedural hurdles in place to try to make it harder for prisons to put people in solitary and to keep them there. And we supported the funding of this Department of Corrections ombudsman position. And I think the Department of Corrections has new leadership as part of some of the heat that we generated. Is there more we can do, or are we sort of in a watch and wait posture right now?
Well, in the 2024 session, the bills did pass on party lines, but the governor vetoed.
Right.
So Sheila, any updates on that you know of?
Ever so briefly, Jamie, you have it right. We are in a wait and see right now. It may come back as a messaging bill next year, knowing that it's very unlikely for the governor to sign it. But I think next year is not the year it's likely to go into law. Now, God is good. We are people of faith. Crazier things have happened. And we want to be prepared for that. Take it away, Anne.
No? Any other questions? Go ahead, Arlene.
Thanks. This has been really great. One last question, and I hope I didn't miss it because I had to just step away for a little bit, is has VICPP taken any, I know it's regarding the constitutional amendments that are expected to be introduced next year for the 2-year voting. And I know that they won't take a stand on the one that will probably deal with abortion, but how about the one with marriage equality?
We are absolutely going to take a stand in favor of automatic restoration of voting rights, which is one of the constitutional amendments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The other two, as an interfaith organization, there's just too much division among the faith community. I encourage folks to continue to advocate your values, but Virginia Interfaith will not take a position on either of those constitutional amendments.
Thanks.
Thank you. So just concluding comments to say, mark your calendars, watch the weekly roundup that comes out on Wednesdays for additions. Take out your calendar when you're looking at that weekly roundup. So we have upcoming September 22, the NoVA chapter's regional celebration event. October 29th, there's an affordable housing and the faith community program that the Interfaith Center is doing in conjunction with the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Association or something like that. That's not what it used to be something else. November 5th is
Alliance.
Alliance.
Alliance, thank you. November 5th is election day, but you know what? Early voting starts next week, September 20th. Get out and vote quickly. And then the day for all people, as Kay Francis reminded us, is January the 15th, 2025. Saying that year is shocking to me. As an old person. Anyway, okay, Eva had a quick question. We have 1 minute.
Quick question about the 22nd event. I think Nancy and I had been talking about it, and it's unlikely we could do a table. And so we thought that's what we had to do. But from how you presented it tonight, we could just advertise
Individual
it
tickets.
heavily and try to get as many people as we can get. Is that correct?
Yes, individual tickets. We've already
Okay,
had a
great.
number of people purchase a ticket. They're coming on
Okay.
their own or they're coming as a couple.
Great. Thanks, Ann.
Anything else? Well, a very, very deep bow of gratitude to all of you. It's very exciting to see your faces in the squares or your names in the squares. One of these days we may actually try to do this in person, but isn't it convenient to get up from your
Yes.
dining room table and come to your computer? Seems that way to me. And again, thank you all. We're launching into a very busy season for all of us, I think. So take a deep breath, say a word of gratitude, and I'll say a word of gratitude to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Take care.
you.
Be well.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Ann.
this weather.
See you soon.
See you the 22nd.